Grainhenge whiskey from Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. Should you be chasing these? Stay tuned for the Whiskey Whistle. Hey, my whiskey people. Mark Kaufman here for Whiskey Whistle on YouTube, sharing a little whiskey awesomeness from Winnipeg, the center of North America, bringing you a very special Canadian whiskey premiere on my channel. Now, this is probably a whiskey that you've never heard of, and if you're in Canada, you still may not have heard of Grainhenge. This is from Troubled Monk Brewery and Distillery in Red Deer, Alberta. And full disclosure, these were donated to the channel by the company. Thank you very much, Grainhenge and everybody at Troubled Monk. I'm super excited to try these. This is their previous release, which I think is still available, called Meeting Creek Whiskey. 56.7% ABV, cask strength obviously. And it says sample not for sale. And then we have, this is their newest release, and this one is called Elevator Row Whiskey. And a lot of this, the imagery, the terminology, evokes the, what can I call it? The iconic nature of not only Alberta's, but Canada's grain elevators, especially here in the prairies. You can see them dotted all over Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta. And I think they're not used anymore. And they basically just stand as kind of like a monument to an era where that was how grain was looked after in the grain elevators. So anyway, and that actually that imagery is part and parcel of why they call the whiskey Grainhenge. So Red Deer, Alberta, right smack dab, practically the middle of the prairies, and surrounded by grain elevators. And I'll put some pictures up here for you just so you can see them. And so they're kind of like Stonehenge, but for Canadians. So Grainhenge, great name. I love that. Cask strength, which is fantastic. I'm going to get these poured, and then we'll talk a little bit about these. So first, the Meeting Creek Whiskey. And what I find interesting about these, and these are sealed actually, which is great, is that it appears that they're all matured in brand new charred American oak barrels. In other words, never before used, not ex-bourbon barrels, virgin oak barrels. Let's enjoy ourselves. There we go. Ha 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 ha. Okay, so that is the Meeting Creek. And then I'll pour the Elevator Row. Looks like somebody complained about the small font on the first batch of samples. Okay. Not me. Not yet. And a little more. There we go. Looks pretty even, Steven. Just a little. There. Beautiful color. Red Deer, Alberta. Let me just read this to you. This is from the Grainhenge website. La 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 la. Okay, so it's a single malt whiskey. That's fantastic. I won't read the tasting notes. ABV 56.7%. Here's the important things. Maturation 40 months. So that is 3 years and 4 months. So 4 months beyond the ability to call this whiskey here in Canada, as well as places like Scotland and Ireland. People may not know this, but in USA, there is no time specified. It simply has to be in a barrel for a period of time. Unless it's straight, and then that's a minimum of 2 or 4 years, depending on what it says or does not say on the label. Anyway, so, pardon me, 40 months. More great information. Cask types. Number 2, New American Oak. And number 4, New American Oak. Number 2, Char. And number 4, Char. Number 4 would be very heavy. Almost very often the standard used in American bourbon making. Number 2 is a little bit light, so a little bit beyond a toast, but it's still charred. And even more great information, we've got the mash bill here. So we've got 2-row amber, amber malt, crystal malt, and chocolate malt. So that is fantastic. I think that chocolate malt is underutilized in whiskey making. Things are changing, but okay, so that is the Meeting Creek. And then I'll tell you about Elevator Row. Elevator Row, again, I'm going to skip those tasting notes. ABV is 58.2%. New World single malt. And I think the reason they use the word New World is the same way that I've used it in the past. And that is to say that Canada really never was a single malt distiller, a single malt whiskey maker. However, single malt whiskey is now made in so many places other than Scotland and Ireland, where you found it historically. I guess you could say Scotland is really the home, the Mecca, the place where people think of, okay, that's single malt, and they're almost synonymous. But things are moving away from that, aren't they? Now in Canada, there's got to be, I don't know, like a dozen. 18? Is there 18? Is there 20? Is there 24 distillers that are making single malt whiskey here in Canada? Something like that. And there's got to be a good 30 or 40, maybe even 50 distillers in USA making single malt American whiskey. Then you've got all the other European countries and all over Asia. South Korea now is making single malt whiskey. So that's the New World, isn't it? It's not the wine New World. It's New World whiskey. New World single malt whiskey. Okay, 58.2%. Maturation, 43 months. So a little bit older. And we have different casks. We have number 3 New American Oak, number 3 Char, and number 4 Char New American Oak. We also have a different mash bill. And that is 2-row dark Munich, Munnen barley, dark Munnen barley. That's the style. So that's really, really cool. I don't know very much about that type of malt. And what I'll mention is that Troubled Monk, the makers of Grainhenge whiskey, are themselves brewers first. First and foremost, historically first. And now they also distill. And they've been brewing for 7 years. They have been distilling, obviously, for about, I guess about 43 months. Okay, so that's cool. I'll put the prices here in a little notation so that you can see what those prices are like. I'm guessing probably, I don't know, $120 would be my guess for Alberta. We'll have a look at the color. Should be pretty much about the same, but let's have a look. So what do we see there for color? I'm going to have to hold it up this way. Well, it's a real nice dark amber, isn't it? More of an amber hue than copper, but about the same color intensity as the copper pot still. It lacks the pinky hue, however. Okay, so you could almost call that, bourbon whiskey color. And we'll have a look at the legs. These are both very high proof, so that will negatively affect the thickness of the legs because 48% is the most viscous concentration of water and alcohol. However, we have lots of content from those fresh oak casks, the virgin oak. So that may actually work in its favor for mouthfeel and the legs, making them look a little bit slower, a little bit beefier. Okay, let's see what we have here for legs. And yes, both roughly the same speed. And quite quick at first, and then very drippy following. And we can see some nice legs on both of these. Great. I'm guessing we'll have something that's a little bit lighter in body and yet nicely mouth coating. So we're going to get this started. Now here on Whiskey Whistle, what I do is I check out, of course, the color and the legs as I just did, pardon me. And then we check out the nose, the palate, and the finish, neat, and then with water. And then finally give it a Whiskey Whistle whiskey score. That score is based on, well, roughly, I don't know, 720 reviews that I've so far logged. And should give you a good indication of how it sits in terms of, well, my repertoire of predominantly Scotch single malt, but also lots of Canadian single malts as well. Lots of world single malts, bourbons, Irish whiskeys, Asian whiskeys, European whiskeys. So we should get, I think I can offer a pretty good indication of what these are like. We're going to start with the Meeting Creek, and then we'll finish with the Elevator Row. So we'll have start with the one whiskey score, start with the last, and then the Whiskey Whistle score at the end for Elevator Row. And before we get into that, don't forget to subscribe to Whiskey Whistle. Right over here, hit that subscription button. Hit the bell also, ding ding, so that you're notified of future Whiskey Whistles. I don't want you to miss what's coming next. There's going to be lots of great things coming up. And if you're watching a lot of content here with me on Whiskey Whistle, please consider checking me out on Patreon, pardon me, and join the Whiskey Whistle crew, patreon.com/Whiskey Whistle. You'll get your name in the credits at the end of each video. You'll also get advanced viewing of future Whiskey Whistles like this one. Last but not least, when you are eligible, you will receive a Whiskey Whistle Glencairn glass. And I'm in the process of ordering t-shirts. So those will be coming very soon as well for the Whiskey Whistle crew. I've also opened the Whiskey Whistle crew to buymeacoffee.com/Whiskey Whistle. So check that out on Buy Me a Coffee if you like that as opposed to Patreon. Wonderful. Well, let's get started here with the Meeting Creek from Grainhenge Whiskey. How does it smell and how does it taste? We'll start neat and then we'll add some water and check it out again. This is a really confusing single malt. The only thing that I've had that is kind of like this would be from Colorado, from Stranahan's. There we go. I had to picture the bottle in my mind so I could remember the name of the whiskey. Stranahan's American Single Malt, also matured in virgin oak. Right off the bat, I want to say that I like the combination of two different oak chars, one a little bit less and one a little bit more. I think this was 3 and 4. There is a butteriness to it. There is some wonderful rich caramel, toffee, something like a milky coffee flavored toffee. A dusting of cocoa powder, kind of like what you see on the top of tiramisu. Some big spice. Lots of vanilla and something kind of like cinnamon, But you know, it's not quite exactly like cinnamon, is it? But it's of the same ilk. It's very warming, and my nose is also telling me that this is sufficiently mature to bottle, even though it's spent only 3 years and 4 months in cask. So well done, and I think that's partially the effect of virgin American oak. And this is why a lot of bourbon is roughly aged very similarly to this one. Though if this were a straight American straight malt whiskey, which it qualifies as, well, they would have to put the age on the bottle because it's less than 4 years. But anyway, it still qualifies as a straight whiskey in USA. It's a single malt here in Canada. It's a whiskey in Canada, pardon me. It's a whiskey everywhere in the world. And it smells fantastic. A little bit of Dr. Pepper coming through here. And I should know, I crush a lot of Dr. Pepper Slurpees. Not a lot. A couple a year. Wonderful. Okay, well, let's get into the palate here now for the the Meeting Creek. Meeting Creek. Okay. Again, it's just very confusing. You see, Stranahan's doesn't really do super high proof. I think their Diamond Peak tops out at, I don't know, 51% or something like that. But that proof and this oak and the malt, it's really like a super high proof bourbon. The maltiness is adding complexity, unlike corn. I think few people would deny that barley malt, when distilled, does a little bit more for the whiskey than corn. Corn, when you use corn, you really got to focus on the wood. And here we have both. We've got the malt. We've got chocolate malt, crystal malt, which is very, very sweet. Chocolate malt is too, but you're losing fermentable sugars because you're roasting those malted barley corns so heavily. A really nice spirit, though. Again, this is just a little confusing for me. I'm really enjoying it, so just be patient. Let me get into this. Dried apple chips, which almost get a little bit of a sugary burst to them, don't they? Big, bold spice. Cinnamon like zing. Cinnamon hearts. A bit of nice white pepper. There's still a tiny little bit of cocoa on the palate as well. Fresh orchard fruits. These spices, that big, bold caramel. And then it finishes with this crescendo of spice and some peppery heat coming in. And somewhere towards the end of the palate, if you've tried a good cross-section of ages of whiskeys, you will taste that little marker that's telling you, okay, this is a youthful whiskey. Super astringent, very, very tannic, and yet at the same time very sweet, very flavorful, spicy, appley. That hint of cocoa. It's got a very, very long finish, fueled by those virgin oak barrels. And we're going to add some water here. All right. Use my little eyedropper until I can find my Angel's Share glass dropper. Let's add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. About 1 milliliter of water added. And I am going to agitate this because I want to get those molecules that couldn't break through the meniscus of the water to jump out at me. And then we'll let it sit for just a minute. And I'm going to cheat, and I want to have a little bit of a tiny whiff of Elevator Row. Much more delicate. Higher in ABV. And yet there's something kind of green fruity about it. Green grapes. Maybe a bit of ripe kiwi. But we'll get to that when we get to it. All right, so now with water, let's check out the Meeting Creek from Grainhenge. I'm getting some nice, unusual spices here. Interestingly, a little bit of jasmine, sandalwood, a tiny bit of clove. It's kind of like that incense that you'll see wafted, for example, at certain religious ceremonies. It's very crisp, like some fresh linen dried in the garden amongst, a big backyard full of flowers. Tiny bit of mint. Okay, let's check out that palette then with water. Cheers, everybody. And a big cheers to everybody at Troubled Monk working on Grainhenge whiskey. Well done with this. Oh, yeah. Those bitey tannins have really, really dropped here. Much more sweet. Much more orchard, apple fruits, apple skins. It's still a little bit tannic. Of course, it's been matured in virgin oak. That bit of cocoa still there. A little bit of lightly roasted fresh coffee grounds. A bit of burnt sugar candy. Still very warm and intense at the finish. And there's something here that's not unlike Glenmorangie Signet, albeit younger, without as many casks blended together. And that's a different malt altogether. But there's something somewhat similar there. But a really nice, wonderful cut with just the right amount of heads. And they cut that tail right off, which prevents the whiskey from getting kind of stanky as you leave it in the glass, especially in an empty glass. But no, that's going to be a really nice empty glass, dried empty glass smell coming from there, I am sure. So let's get on to the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for Grainhenge Meeting Creek. I got it. What is that going to be, folks? It's going to be 86 out of 100. You heard it. 86 out of 100 is the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for Grainhenge whiskey Meeting Creek. And I have to again thank the people at Troubled Monk for getting me this sample. Excellent. Well, I'm super excited to try the next. It's got a different profile altogether. And we have, oh, pardon me, for Meeting Creek, that was number 2 char and number 4 char. So that really, really made a big difference there with that less charry char. And then here we have number 3 and 4, which pretty much a lot of American distilleries use number 3 and 4 for their bourbons and their ryes, and they're straight whatever whiskey. Okay, and this mash bill was a single variety of malted barley, and that is dark Munich. Okay, so the nose here, neat for elevator row. There's a little bit of cigar box coming through here, which is very, very cool. So a nice, light, mildly aged tobacco, fresh tobacco. I dare say a little bit of leather here. And some green grapes, a little bit of fresh kiwi. And some lime pith. It's really, really fresh, and it's totally different than the Meeting Creek. One thing you should do when you are trying 2 different whiskeys is to make sure you smell them back and forth. Big caramel over here. That sweet lime, like, I don't know, key lime pie. Lime cordial, roses, lime cordial. For the nose only, this is more up my alley. but this is also very nice. Interestingly, the effect of the maturation seems more delicate here. That could be related to season and temperature. All right. Well, time to get into this palate. Cheers. Very fresh, very fruity. That oak is taking a backseat here to the malt. The malt is really the driver of the flavor here, which is fruity, more delicate spice, tiny bit of sweet ginger snappiness. Much less vanilla. We have some kind of like, let's call it agave syrup as the sweetness. It doesn't have the butteriness of the Meeting Creek, but I would say it's a little bit more complex. There's a little bit of that sweet limey pie-ness coming through here. Yes. Take some fresh lime juice and squeeze that into a little pile of icing sugar and muddle it up. Add a little bit of club soda, and you've got this fizziness, and you've got the creamy, that sweet sugary flavor mixed with that juiciness of that lime. Very interesting. The finish is not quite as long as the Meeting Creek, but again, there's more going on here. So far, this is much more to my liking, but this is, as you know, as I rated here, it's a very, very, very good whiskey, especially for something so young. The mouthfeel is light. It is mouth coating, but it is also very astringent in a way that it's as though you actually were eating some lime pith. Okay, let's add some water over here to Elevator Row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I want to add only 10, a little bit less than 1 milliliter. The reason being that I'm really enjoying sipping this neat more so than the first, and I feel that minimal water here is needed. Agitate once. More of that lime coming through. Okay, so the nose now with water. A little bit sort of generic citrus fruit. It's still sweet. Like lemon and lime flavored suckers. Some mint coming through. That's really cool. I felt a little bit of mint here, but I'm noticing this more now with the Elevator Row, which I'm enjoying. It's very fresh, and it really suits the season as well. Much creamier. At the front of the palate, still a little bit tannic. but not overly so as that moves towards the finish. Wonderful clean flavors in the finish as well. But again, just not super long as the Meeting Creek was. And I'm adding more water because I really feel like I want to explore this. And the finish became very intensely astringent with this one with water added. My mouth is still very spicy and very, very dry. Okay, here we go. So that's 20 drops or so. So that's about 1.5 milliliters. Same thing going on in the nose. Some more sweetness coming through on the nose now. The palate. Super nice. That's the right amount of water for the palate in terms of the finish. But if I drew the similarity of Glenmorangie Signet with the Meeting Creek, with this one it's much more like Othrusk or Akroisk if you want to look at it phonetically, the way it's spelled. I believe it's Othrusk, I think. Very intense, intensely citric and super bright. And it'll just light up your face the second you try almost any Othrusk, just because of the way it's made, the place where it's made, all of that terroir plus distillery know-how. And yet those citrus flavors do make me think of Glenmorangie, but with that super intense astringency, which is good. It's not bad here. And I think we'll see some really fantastic things even as early as 5 years. I mean, we're already beyond good here. We're into the very good, which is beautiful. So let's get on to the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for Elevator Row from Grainhenge Whiskey. What is that going to be, folks? It's going to be 86 out of 100. You heard it, 86 out of 100 is the WhiskyWhistle whiskey score for Elevator Row. Check out their website, Grainhenge, grainhenge.com, and for their brewery, troubledmonk.com. Thanks to the fine people at the brewery and the distillery for looking after me. And don't forget, since these were gifted, take my thoughts with a grain of salt. But I would not be giving these scores if I didn't like them, and if I really found them to be subpar, I probably would have shut the camera off and given up on the review. Anyway, so my hat's off to you guys. Keep on going, push that age, keep innovating with malts and with barrels. I think that's a winning combination. Again, Mark here at WhiskyWhistle. Don't forget to subscribe and check me out on Patreon and also on buymeacoffee.com. All right, take care, folks. Bye now.